Hi, this is Don Gettner with Ridge Engineering. In this tutorial I'm going to show you a new feature that we're adding to PC Warrants 2 that we're calling study scores. And the basic idea is that if you have a lot of intersections that you've done warrant studies on, and several of them meet the warrants, maybe several don't, but how do you decide which of those intersections are the ones that you're going to spend the money on upgrading? You probably have a process right now of picking the ones that make the most sense to you, but there probably isn't any fast rules on how to do that. So what we're trying to add to the software is a way for you to prioritize your intersections by giving each study a score, and then the higher the score, the more important it might be to consider choosing that one to spend the money to get the signals installed. All right, so how do you do that? We're going to go to the preferences, and then there's a tab called score factors. And the basic idea of this is that each of the warrants is given a weighting factor, and then each warrant has sub-warrant factors as well. And let me explain how this works. So with the signal warrants, and we only are supporting signal warrants right now because multi-way stop warrants may or may not be useful for this. We'll decide that later on. So right now it's just signal warrants, and there's 9 warrants, and each warrant is giving a weighting factor, and you can edit that number. These are not numbers that we're picking. In fact, we have no idea what numbers should be in here. And there are almost no rules on what numbers you can use. So it's kind of wide open right now, and we're hoping that our users will tell us how they want this system to work, assuming that it needs tweaking, which is likely. So each warrant is given a number. And the basic idea is that, okay, if you have 2 intersections and one, the warrant crash experience is met, and one, the peak hour warrant is met, and nothing else, well, it seems reasonable to say that the intersection that has crashes is probably needs some attention before the peak hour one. So the crash experience will be given a relatively higher number. We have 20. Again, we have no idea what that means. Doesn't mean anything at the moment. Other warrants, like the 8-hour warrant, is not quite as important maybe as the crash. We give it a 15. Maybe this should be really high, like 40, 50, so that any crash experience intersection will get a really, really high number. Again, those are entirely up to you to decide. The peak hour warrant, maybe not quite as critical as the 8-hour warrant, so we have a slightly smaller number. Pedestrians, if you have a lot of pedestrians and the pedestrian warrant is met, that's probably relatively important, so it gets a relatively high number. Again, maybe this should be a much higher number. Not very many intersections meet the pedestrian warrant, but if it does meet, there's probably a good chance you're going to need to do something there. Coordinated signal system, we've barely ever had any questions about that. We don't really know what to do with it. It's one of the 9, so it's there. Maybe that should be a really high value if that warrant happens to be the only one that's met, but that's for you to decide. Same for for the intersection near grade crossing. Right now we just have it as a 5. If that warrant is met, it's probably pretty important, so maybe this should be given a higher number. So each of the 9 warrants will be giving a warrant weighting factor, and then each warrant has sub-warrant factors that are the various criteria that has to be met in order for that warrant to be met. And the basic idea of this is, say you have 2 intersections where the only warrant that's met is warrant 1. Well, if you only use the warrant weighting factors, most of those intersections will get the same score. That's probably not intuitively correct. If one intersection just barely meets the warrant, say there's 9 hours that meet the 8-hour criteria, and another intersection has 14 or 15 hours that meet the 8-hour criteria, it might be logical to say that that 14 or 15-hour intersection should be given a higher priority than the other one. And the way to do that is to give the various criteria a sub-warrant weighting factor that's much smaller, so that it'll never completely dominate the warrant being met or not, but will contribute to the value, so that if 2 warrants are met, then the one that has the most of this stuff will get a higher score. And again, we have no idea what these numbers should be. Right now, they're set to be numbers that you can set to the nearest tenth, just because you may want to have 0.5s or 0.4s, 0.1s. This is a 0.1 because you can have a lot of gaps. That number is often fairly large, so this number can't be terribly big, otherwise it would tend to dominate the warrant. So we have a 0.1 for that, and I'll show you an example of where that comes into play. Crash experience, again, there's 4 different criteria. Maybe some are more important to you than others. You can play around with those numbers. So you come up with the 9 values, you come up with the subweighting factors, and at the moment there's no constraints at all on how those are set up. Sometimes when you have weighting matrices, all the values have to add up to, say, 100 or something, or all these values have to add up to 10. We don't have any constraints on that right now. If somebody is an expert in this particular type of decision matrix, maybe you can help us and tell us how to do this better. But at the moment, you can put in whatever numbers you want. All right, so how does this work? Let's just open a couple of studies and we'll see. Now, at the moment, all the studies that are part of the score analysis need to be in the same folder. We may change that at a later date, but it's tricky to try to support a completely wide open structure. So at the moment we're saying create a folder called score study files or something equivalent, and then copy whatever studies that you want to be part of this evaluation into that one folder. So at the moment I've got 8. You easily could have a lot more when you start playing with this stuff. But just to show you how this works, I have 8 studies that are spread around these other folders in this one score study files folder. All right, let's just pick the first one, and if it doesn't meet the site requirements, we're missing gap data. All right, we'll just not require the gap data. So now it evaluates the warrants and it gives it a score, and in this case it's a 32. So where did that 32 come from? You hit the details button, it brings up a screen that's similar to the one where you fill out the weighting forms, but it has more information, and it shows you the results of this study. There's one of the warrants is met, the peak hour warrant, and the others are not. So the peak hour warrant gets, in this case, 10 points, and it gets some points for the sub warrants. And here we have 5 hours that meet the volume criteria, and they have a relatively low sub warrant weighting factor of 0.4. So those 5 hours add another 2 points, so you end up with 12 points for this one warrant. And the others don't get any of the major warrant points, but they do get some of the smaller points because the number of hours that meet the warrant is in here. And you can see this is a pretty low volume intersection, so you only get a few points, and it all adds up to 32, which I think is going to be a pretty low number. So let's get another one. Okay, 46. Again, just 2 warrants are met with this particular data set. The peak hour warrant, which of course is met pretty easily because you only need 1 hour that meets the volume criteria. And then the roadway network, and so the volume criteria for that happens to be met, and you get a few points for that, and you end up with 46 points. And let's open another one. So this one has 6 warrants that are met, and it has a ranking score of 180. So okay, let's see that. And here the 8-hour volume is met, so you get the 15 points, plus you get a bunch of other points because there's a bunch of these that are met. School crossing, peak hour, so all the volumes are all met, and even the intersection near a grade crossing is met. Probably that ought to be a higher number. Not, now that we think about it, I think about it. Okay, so but this has 180 points. So every time you do a study, this ranking score will be shown. Now, if you don't care about this, if you don't want this, if you decide you don't want to use this score feature at all, just disable it here, and you won't see it in the rest of the software. It's just that simple. The software won't calculate the scores, won't show them, won't give you the option of printing the various summaries. Okay, but assuming you want to do that, now once you've opened a bunch of studies and you have a bunch of studies that have the score, you can click on that button and it'll show you the studies that are in that folder and a little bit of information about each of the studies. So it shows you the score, the number of warrants that are met in that study, and then some of the study parameters. So this might be something that you would print out and have handy if you're having a meeting to discuss which of the intersections you should update. And you can sort this grid on any number of criteria. A logical one might be sort them by score, highest to lowest. Now here's an intersection where the warrant didn't meet, but it still has a higher value than an intersection that actually met. That's probably not right, but not all of this data is real data that really came from real intersections. So your data will probably make a little bit more sense. You can sort by date. Any of these columns that have these little triangles on them, you can sort on. And then if you want to, you can save this grid, which looks like a spreadsheet, to a spreadsheet just by clicking on this Save to XLS file. And it'll store a file in the Score Study Files folder that you can then open in Excel and print out or graph or do whatever you want to do. Okay, that's pretty much an introduction to the study scores. We want your help on this because we really don't know what we're doing, but we're hoping that we give you enough of a start to think it through and say, yeah, that's close, but here's what you really should be doing. So let us know what you think, and if we have to make changes, we'll make the changes. All right, thanks